Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming this morning. It's a very important report that we're launching here, and I want to acknowledge, first of all, that we're gathered here on Treaty 1 territory in the homeland of the Red River Métis, and so much of the work that the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives does is to support the TRC calls to action and murdered, missing Indigenous women calls to justice. So that's a very important part of our work. And another very, very important part of our work is to stand with the labour movement and workers and talk about issues of workers' rights and the importance of decent, good jobs here in Manitoba. So it's a pleasure to be here to launch a very important report, For Whom the Bell Tolls. And this was done by Doug Smith, who I'll introduce shortly, about the history of Manitoba Telecom services and then the acquisition by Bell. And we're very grateful for the financial support of this project from Team Union, which represents IT, network engineering, sales, marketing, business administration, and finance. So I'm just going to introduce Dave Olson. How do you say it? Aolson, I'm sorry, to speak a little bit about the team before we introduce Doug Smith.
No, that's right, thanks. Thanks very much. Good morning. My name is Dave Aolson, and I'm the president of Team IFPT Local 161. I want to take this opportunity to thank the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives for the incredible research and analysis they've provided in this report. As a union, we are at a crossroads. We are fighting to maintain good jobs at Bell MTS, and we're worried about the lack of opportunities and prospects for the next generation of workers. The timely report written by the CCPA forms part of a larger campaign and partnership with other unions representing Bell workers in Manitoba to raise awareness of the job loss that has occurred since MTS was purchased by Bell in 2017. Since the acquisition, team members have been through 9 rounds of downsizing, resulting in the loss of over 250 jobs. This doesn't include last week's announcement that Bell is cutting over 1,300 jobs across the country, which will no doubt have an impact on local jobs. These are good, unionized jobs, lost from the Manitoba economy. Team's membership sits at half of what it used to be. Our union colleagues from IBW and Unifor have experienced similar cuts and erosion of union membership. Joe Breland and Richard Ferris from IBW Local 435, who are here today, as well as Jackie Prin from Unifor Local 7, who is currently in bargaining, are here. I want to thank Joe Breland and Richard Ferris are here today, and Jackie Prin from Unifor Local 7, is in bargaining, but I want to thank them for their solidarity and support as we continue with this campaign. Most of us either know or have a family member or friend that's worked for Bell MTS or MTS at some point in its 100-year history. Telecommunications, and especially MTS, has historically been a significant part of Manitoba's strong, diversified economy. MTS was known as an institutional employer like Manitoba Hydro or Great West Life. Up until its purchased by Bell many decades later, MTS had been a reliable, secure source of well-paying, skilled, unionized jobs for Manitoba workers for literally generations. Those days appear to be ending, but it is vital for Manitobans and our economy that we push back against this erosion. Thanks very much.
Thank you. So the team approached us to do this work, and we're pleased to do it. And they wanted to work with Doug Smith, who's previously researched MTS, and CCPA maintains final editorial oversight over the project. So just so you know the relationship there. And it was a pleasure to work with Doug, who I got to learn a little bit about his history as a journalist and a researcher. And we're so lucky to have him here in Manitoba, also to do historical documentation and analysis and commentary. So Doug, please come on up and share your work with us.
Thank you, Molly. When I first was approached to do this, there was some conversation about exactly the scope of the paper, how long it might be. We thought it might be about 20 pages. In the end, I produced a paper that's a lot longer than I thought it would be, 52 pages, because so much of it was so interesting and so complicated. So I just first of all want to thank everybody who was involved for commissioning me to do this. It also reminded me of how old I am and how long this story has been going around, and sort of as I started to get into it, to realize that this was over a quarter of a century ago that the Manitoba government initially privatized MTS. And the incredible sets of twists and turns, and the interrelationship between what was going on with a Manitoba Crown Corporation and national and ultimately international trends. I just want to have a brief summary of the points and narrative of the report, which deals with all of these issues in much greater detail. 26 years ago, in 1997, the Conservative government of Gary Filmon sold the Manitoba telephone system to private investors. By selling MTS, it was undoing the work of a previous Conservative government, which in 1906 bought Bell Canada's Manitoba network. Manitoba was one of the first 3 prairie provinces to establish their own phone companies. They did so because Bell had been slow to provide affordable services to residential and rural customers, preferring to concentrate on business customers. In 1997, at the time of privatization, Manitobans were told that a small, provincially owned Crown corporation could not withstand the harsh competitive winds that changes in federal telecommunications policy were about to unleash. Manitobans were told that only the private sector could provide needed investment in new technology and infrastructure. Furthermore, they were told that privatization was being managed in such a way that it would deliver, quote, a Manitoba preference. Those opponents of the deal, who predicted job loss, higher rates for consumers, and the loss of the provincial government's ability to exercise influence over an increasingly important economic sector, were depicted as naysayers who wanted to live in the past. So after a quarter of a century, it's time for a recounting of the history of the privatized phone company and an accounting of the predictions that were made at the time of privatization. The first thing to note, and this is really a staggering story, it tends to be forgotten, that in 1997, the newly privatized company quickly went to war with its employees. It staged what amounted to a raid on the pension fund, resulting in a 16-year court case that ended at the Supreme Court with the workers' position being completely validated. MTS locked out 2 of its 3 unions in 1999 in a direct assault on job security, and it initiated an endless series of job cuts. Between 1997 and 2017, when the company was sold to Bell, the unionized workforce was cut from about 4,000 to 2,200. And what about the promise that privatization would lead to greater investment? Well, just last year, as readers of the Free Press would know, Bell MTS, when faced with a seemingly endless list of service problems, ended up pointing the finger at the previous guy and saying that privatized MTS had failed to invest in landlines and infrastructure. They said they were making short-term decisions. So, I don't know, do you believe Bell or do you believe MTS that they were making when I say MTS, that MTS has many contexts, right? But the previous administration. As a private Manitoba-based company, MTS lasted for about 20 years. In 2017, it was taken over by Bell Canada. Today, it's really hard to say that it exists any more than as a daub of jam on the lips of Bell Canada. Someday corporate Bell will lick those lips and MTS will simply disappear. It's certainly not the regional headquarters that Bell promised to create in 2017. It can be said with certainty that a significant number of very good jobs have been lost, as unionized employment at MTS has dropped from 4,000 prior to privatization to about 1,500 since privatization. Although people who lost their jobs have been able to take advantage of decent buyouts, their places have not been filled. Many of those who are left behind feel they have no future in the company, and they're right to worry. Just like last week, Bell announced another round of workforce reductions on the national level. Workplace stress is on the rise, and an important future-oriented sector of the Manitoba economy has shrunk. Economically, Manitoba's been a loser. While technological change has led to some job loss, other jobs have been shipped out of the province to non-unionized subcontractors, or even out of the country to the Philippines or India. Since 2017, Bell has switched from local firms for various services such as insurance, benefits, and legal services, switching to preferred and usually central Canadian suppliers, to its preferred and usually central Canadian suppliers. Furthermore, Manitobans no longer exercise any sort of democratic control over MTS. It's also possible to say that a relatively small number of Manitobans made some very good short-term money on the privatization of MTS. An even smaller number did very well serving on the board of the newly privatized company. But that company's all but gone. The people who make the significant decisions about investment and employment in Manitoba do not live here. They have drained jobs from the province, and their predecessors have failed to invest in services that Manitobans continue to depend upon. The people who make the key decisions about the future of Bell MTS are legally obliged to advance the interests of their shareholders. It's doubtful that those shareholders sit up at night worrying about the future of the technology sector in Manitoba or about employment levels in Manitoba. They certainly don't worry if Manitoba is Bell's headquarters for Western Canada, or even what that means. So on its home terms, privatization has been a failure. Weak provisions have been put in place to make sure the company did not fall into the hands of out-of-town investors. Either privatized MTS failed to make needed investments, which is what Bell claims, or in the 5 years, Manitobans, like all Canadians, have ended up paying some of the highest rates in the world, in the industrialized world, for wireless services. So, this is a cautionary tale and a depressing one, but it shouldn't be immobilizing. Regulatory policies can be weaned away from the current blind faith in the market. Our regulators tend to preach competition to industry leaders who despise competition. Sometimes I wonder if the only job more disheartening than working for the Competition Bureau and regulating the telecommunications sector is being the chaperone at a junior high school dance. Your job is to keep them apart. They're determined to get together. There are, of course, fewer rewards available to high school chaperones. Last April, Bell appointed former Industry Minister Navdeep Bains as its Chief Corporate Affairs Officer. A few years earlier, Liberal Industry Minister John Manley was appointed Chair of the TELUS Board of Directors. It needn't be that way. Government regulators can tie approvals for requirements for telecommunication companies to invest in local economies and workforces. Telecommunication companies make tremendous profits based on government-granted rights to provide services. Canada could make sure that companies have labour policies that respect Canadian workers. There's an example that can be drawn on, and it's referred to in the report from the States, where the American Labor Department under the Biden administration has developed a strategy to enhance local investment and in telecommunications and to protect worker rights in telecommunications. It's based on a belief that those are good jobs and they should be maintained as good jobs. Finally, it's worthwhile to look to the west of us. Another rebuke to the argument that we needed to privatize Manitoba telephone system is the fact that SaskTel is still with us. It is a small, it is a crown corporation in a small province that has been able to withstand the winds of competition. It continues to offer some of the lowest rates in the country while returning a healthy dividend to the people of Saskatchewan. Re-establishing public ownership would be difficult and expensive. It may not be easily done on the provincial scale, but it shouldn't be simply abandoned as a concept. Particularly when you look at a sector that's almost daring people daring governments to nationalize it as they continually move to what appears to be a monopoly situation, right? I mean, the latest round of Shaw and Rogers leads to a situation where they're really only one merger away from a national monopoly anyhow. It's like you know, in the past people talk about how Crown corporations are sometimes set up to be privatized as various divisions are turned away. They're set up to be nationalized. It's almost like it's part of a plan. I don't believe that, but and they're not loved. There's a reference, a study here that was done in BC of a survey of people and their frustrations with the telephone companies, the lack of opacity in billing and contracts and so on. So now they wouldn't be loved necessarily if they were nationalized, but nobody would particularly go to bat for them. Anyhow, that's a summary of my paper. Take any questions? Martin? Or do you want to talk afterwards?
Well,
We also have Aaron Spencer.
Oh, Jimmy, there's more, so we'll talk afterwards. Sorry about that. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, sorry. Yeah. Thanks, Doug. Thanks so much. And I wanted to introduce Aaron Spencer, who's the Executive Director of Team, to give some more context, and then we'll have time for some questions.
Thanks very much, Molly. And thanks to everybody for joining us here today. And as Doug mentioned, I mean, these are good jobs that are leaving the Manitoba economy. Team has been representing workers in many of these jobs for over 50 years. Our members are the engineers in IT and network services who help to keep our phones, TV, and internet running. They are the people working in sales and marketing who come up with all those clever ways to get us to want those latest services and to be able to rent the latest pay-per-view movies. Team members are the people who lead the call center service representatives that remain here in Manitoba. The folks that I hope I get, that we all hope we get when we have to call in as a customer. These are the hardworking and knowledgeable members of Unifor Local 7. And as well, our members lead the technicians who install and also help to keep our phones, internet, and TV working. The skilled and hardworking members of the IBW. All three units have taken significant job loss cuts under Bell. Under Bell, Team has seen a 70% reduction in new external hires compared with the 6 years pre-takeover. And the bulk of these new hires that we do have are students in co-ops. Many of these students work part-time hours while completing their degrees or programs, and unfortunately, there are fewer and fewer opportunities for them to stay after they graduate. Manitobans, in some cases, are not even being given opportunities to compete for jobs that exist and can be performed remotely. We see Bell post jobs that can be done remotely anywhere from across the country, basically listing every major work location from coast to coast, except Winnipeg. Existing employees here in some cases are not being given opportunities under Bell to work on and develop their knowledge of new technologies that they otherwise would have or could have under MTS. I think the most frustrating part for our team members is when they're being targeted for layoff here in Manitoba, while jobs similar in nature to theirs are available and being posted outside of Manitoba. This is work that can be performed remotely from almost anywhere. And yet, Bell said to our members that they would have to relocate outside of Manitoba and Team to be able to do these jobs. They wouldn't even consider them. We're talking about 20+ year employees laid off. Some members have been targeted multiple rounds. And with more and more of their co-workers leaving each round, we've even had members report feeling survivor's guilt. In summary, jobs are being cut here. Work is being centralized in the eastern provinces and western locations. When Bell bought MTS, they said Manitoba was going to be the western headquarters of the company, and they bought MTS to grow it, not shrink it. But all we've seen here is cut after cut. Manitobans deserve better, we deserve fairness, and we deserve a brighter future. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Erin. So yes, now welcome any questions. And maybe we can move our camera around to get the answers.
maybe I could ask one question, Jeff. How do you square your analysis with like a sort of general trend, maybe even a global trend, particularly for technology companies, maybe post-pandemic, maybe whatever, maybe it's just, you know, the part of the cycle, where, you know, significant layoffs have occurred, you know, like I say, almost globally in sort of corporatized IT and telecommunication companies. Just, I don't know if you had any thoughts, you know, about that trend compared to, you know, the Bell MTS story.
Well, a lot of this work is jobs are being contracted out. So the work is still being done in many cases. The work is no longer being done in Canada, it's no longer being done in Manitoba, it's no longer being done by unionized firms, but by non-unionized firms. So I just want, you're talking about there being a global trend. I just want to make clear that in lots of cases, these are very, very profitable companies. Again, talking about the Canadian telecommunications companies. We're not talking about companies that are reporting losses or dealing with having to make tough decisions. We're talking about companies that are doing very, very well, that Bell created a company called Nordia and then sold Nordia. It's moved many of its jobs to Nordia. It's moved jobs to the Philippines, to a company which has some sort of tenuous or contentious relationship with Bell. So, from my conversations with people from the various unions, also many of these jobs, when you have a layoff, the work remains and the workload increases. So that's the best I can do as an answer to that. There's job loss in other sectors. It's a very profitable business to be in.
Some of this job loss, like to your point, Marty, it's inevitable due to the technological change.
Some is inevitable. Yeah.
Sure. And even with the takeover, we did anticipate that there would be some job loss, redundancies. But I think the important thing to remember now is like Doug mentioned, they're not cutting only for the technological changes right now. So it's important, if there are going to be the job losses that are inevitable through technological change, that we really try and focus on those other options to keep good paying jobs in Manitoba here, be it through an increase in employees here, an increase in using local suppliers, an increase in using local contractors. There are options that can mitigate the inevitable job loss.
Yes, Joe Greeland for IBAW, did you want to?
Yeah, so just a couple things to add. Like they both said, the work still has to get done, right? So, whether it's contractors or subcontractors, Bell's kind of a company that does that. They'll contract a company, they contract another company, they contract another company. So there's still local people that are doing it. So the work's still getting done. Just a couple things. So first of all, I started at MTS 35 years ago. Started off in the mailroom, and then I became a technician for many years, filled many different roles, and then I've been in the union office for a while now. But just seeing the slow demise and how, like on our end, how it's happened. So just a couple of clarifications on Doug's paper here is, it's something to note where even back in the day, in the 90s, they talked about this huge debt. So this debt, around privatization, most of that debt was brought upon by the private line conversion that the government at the time said, and it had to be done. It was years overdue. So the private line conversion, also, at the time, whether it was driven by the CRTC, I'm not sure, but providing new service to remote communities, up north and cottage country and stuff like that. So a lot of that debt that was talked about was from capital projects that were huge, and part of that also just because of the timing was the company was looking at technology. So such as the internet. Most, they weren't really into the TV yet, but you know, the internet was coming about, so they were spending money getting the province ready for that. And so again, that adds to that debt. Now, when we talk about, you know, going forward, okay, so it's privatized, they've already let some of the capital work done, they took some of that money now that was, I guess, with the shareholder buying and that, and throughout the years, they expanded, and in 03, again, I was part of the original pilot project television in Winnipeg. So again, huge capital projects all around. You've got to, you know, change the network, the plant, as it were. But at the same time, they're not hiring people. They're, you know, luckily in the IBW collective agreement, we've got wording to say, you know, that they can't have contractors while our members are on layoff. So what they did is it was through attrition when people retired and so forth. They just kept reducing until it's variable, and then just reducing after that. So, but again, you know, they have to try and keep up with the times now that it's a private company and with the technology, internet, TV, and all the rest of the stuff. But you know, again, to add to what Doug was saying, you look at a company like Saskatoon, which is a crown corporation or, you know, province-owned telephone company. They've done a great job of keeping those jobs and still keeping up with technology and all that kind of stuff. So to see how it's gone with us, it's done nothing more than fill certain people's pockets. Now, you know, again, I was around during privatization, and it's no secret, if you look back at the news reports and back in the day, all the higher ranking official MTS people were friends with the government at the time. So they knew what was going on. And also what's pretty important is these people that were high ranking people at the phone company back in the day were paying into the same defined benefit pension. So they had nothing to lose. They were still guaranteed their pensions, which were greatly inflated. They were still able to buy in shares and benefit from the sale of the company. So of course they're not going to kick up a fuss about any of this. I mean, so, you know, I'm sure it will probably be mentioned again, but other companies such as Manitoba Hydro and that nowadays really have to look at this, have to look at this model, and the voting public really have to, you know, again, look back in history and see how it all unfolded.
You know, Joe mentioned Saskatoon, you did too. Could you just, like, I don't know how deeply, and I haven't read through it very closely, but like, indeed, Saskatoon's workforce, like, how has it fared over the years?
There have been reductions in Saskatoon as well. I mean, when you have, I want to be careful, so there's a paper about Manitoba telephone system, not Saskatoon.
Sure.
I mean, Saskatoon is not beyond criticism. I'm sure that Unifor would have some positive words to say about the management of Saskatoon. But first of all, Saskatoon, because it remains as a local competitor, it has helped keep rates down in Saskatchewan compared to Manitoba and the Western Canada. So, like when Bell Canada took over, you have sort of two sets of arguments. One is to keep, it's the argument put forward by the regulators. You need 4 companies.
Yeah.
And they keep wanting to have 3 companies, 2 companies. The companies, right? I mean, so the presence of Saskatoon has served as a break to on monopolization. It also pays a dividend to the government of Saskatchewan. There's no, I don't believe Bell Canada pays dividends to the government of Manitoba. So there's an economic benefit. Saskatoon has to make its decisions based on the interests of Saskatchewan. They need to take into account that. don't want to, as Aaron said, this is an industry where technological change does drive some job loss, right? I mean, that's going to happen, but I mean, that's not been, but the point that Joe's made and others is that when work is contracted out, that's not technological change. I mean, technology may allow you to have work done in the Philippines. It may allow you, so that the first person who picks up your phone call, your phone in the MPS, I believe, is a carrier. If you've got so you have, you're phoning to the Philippines to get certain technological advice. Manitoba doesn't have to, Saskatchewan, it has political constraints in its decisions. So, you know, and more to the point, those are jobs which still exist, they just exist somewhere else, they pay less. People who work for Nordia in Ontario don't pay taxes in Manitoba, they don't buy groceries in Manitoba, they pay rent in Manitoba, they live here. I mean, we're a hinterland. If we don't stand up for ourselves, we'll get shafted.
Thanks, Doug. Do you have any other
Well,
questions?
I don't know if folks mind, I could have a couple others.
We don't mind.
We could do- I don't know if you looked at this, at the political sort of motivations or the political context, you know, of the privatization. But I just, you know, I just wonder, like, you know, there was some narrative at the time about how, you know, how Bell was super keen to acquire MTS for whatever strategic, you know, reasons they might have had. Like, I don't know, like, is, like, I don't know if you have any sense as to the, like, the attractiveness of SaskTel these days. Like, it was 25 years since Bell bought MTS. There, and SaskTel remains independent. You know, like I say, the narrative at the time was, you know, Bell's going to buy it one of these days, so, you know, we're just going to organize it now. I mean, among other of the narratives. But, you know, it doesn't seem to be the case with SaskTel, or maybe it is the case.
I wouldn't know. I mean, I would guess that, I mean, observing from a province away, you've had a lengthy period of small C conservative government in Saskatchewan, which has not sold its telephone company. Why that would be, if I had to guess, it would be one, they like having the dividends. I mean, they do have bills to pay. Two, maybe it's it would appear to be a bit of a third rail issue that people in Saskatchewan like the service. I mean, then we could wake up tomorrow and open the paper and see that it's going to be sold. So I don't want to make any strong statements about motivations of Saskatchewan part of the other.
Yeah, and I'll just maybe speak. It's too bad that Unifor isn't here, because Unifor has, you know, a lot of the people who work for SaskTel, so I'm sure they have contacts out that way.
Yeah.
However, the IBW kind of has close contacts with, you know, the power company and some parts of the phone company that are maybe not their membership. But, you know, I think that's always looming on the horizon, is that, but I think at the top, like currently, and I mean, even if we look back 10 years, the people of Saskatchewan still like that being a provincially owned company. So I think they use that partly when they vote. So I think that's
Right, like Chuck says, third rail issue.
Yeah, that's what I meant by that.
Yeah.
Even if you look even back here, the government at the time, the BC government at the time, said they weren't going to privatize it right up until they did.
And there was at least, you know, apparently public opposition to the sale.
Times.
I mean, I think there was a poll showing considerable opposition to the sale, and then they lost the next election.
Right. Yes, right.
So that would have been, I think that was a contributing factor to the election loss. So that may be, but I mean, now we're in the realm of pure speculation. So that's right. It's sketchful.
What do you think about the competitive lay of the land now, like the competitive landscape now? You know, at the time that, you know, so, you know, some MTS cell customers were sort of portioned off to TELUS, some to ExploreNet, were wound down the service completely. You know, so let's say the regulators, you know, had some sense of, you know, trying to create like the competent four competitors. You know, one of the operators, you know, arguably did a crappy job, and now I've left town. I don't know if you know, if the sort of competitive landscape, if that was anything that you.
Well, I mean, what seems to happen is that I talk about. I mean, the strategy seems to be to want to have four competitors.
The regulator.
The regulator. I mean, the government of Canada wants there to be four competitors, and we can have a truly competitive market. They have four companies. Two of them want to merge. So, I mean, one option would be to block the merger, let the four healthy competitors compete. Instead, they seem to always let the merger go ahead, which creates superpower. And then they try to magic up out of practically thin air. You know, it's like if they said, you know, Martin and Doug, why don't you start up an a telephone company? Here's some subscribers. I mean, it's not quite like that, but I mean, ExploreNet was not a telephone company; it was a rural internet company.
And now they've got Videotron from Quebec.
This is the national version of that.
Yeah.
Is that right? I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, you know, it's kind of like the joke about the definition of madness. You know, you keep on doing the same thing, and you're going to end up with the same result. I mean, you got what you want. Why then allow the merger to happen? I mean, I was just reading in the British paper The Guardian yesterday, or the day before. There's a big merger that's just been proposed between a number of wireless services in England, and it's exactly the same thing. For three, and the arguments are much the same.
At least through this merger, Shaw and Rogers, at least we're seeing that there was a protection or agreement built into the deal to create jobs in the West, because potentially, you know, with Rogers, you know, they're centralizing the East, taking over a company in the West. There's potential that this drain from the West job drain from the West could continue. So at least in this agreement, it was built in to create 3,000 new jobs. So that shows that these types of protections can happen, and we can build in these protections for employment with the governments when we're making these deals, and so that it shows that there's options available to other paths that they can take.
Yeah. Any consideration at all, like in, you know, your thinking or analysis, you guys too, Joe, like just the actual sort of physical, you know, kind of geography of Manitoba and the demography, the fact that everybody's concentrated in the south and that there is this huge hinterland, you know, sparsely populated, where, you know, the kind of telecommunication services become more costly to deliver. I mean, I don't really think that necessarily. I don't think Bell does a fantastic job or spends all that much money in the internet anyways. But that's not an issue.
To what you were saying, it's like priorities. Maybe SaskTel has different priorities. And because they have an obligation and mandate to the Saskatchewan people, they have prioritized it higher to provide coverage to those less densely populated areas that might not otherwise get that coverage if you're just focusing on cost saving.
They have a higher priority, you said.
Perhaps. I would think they have more coverage, into those rural communities. And
With
they
all
do
respect,
that
they have, like,
more
the population
densely
is more
populated.
spread out in Saskatchewan.
This one.
than-
But,
Oh, the population density is still pretty much the same.
The same, I
In
mean,
Saskatchewan.
yeah.
the point of it is they're not driven,
There's a lot of geographies.
yeah, they're not driven solely by profit. At the end of the day, the priorities are different.
Right.
And realistically, Bell is used to dealing with that type of geography. I mean, in Eastern Canada, they have, you look at Southern Ontario, you look at Northern Ontario, they're used to dealing with remote communities and people working, for the company in those areas. So, I mean, what really comes down to for them spending, initializing their capital projects, it's in the urban centers, right? Like it's driven by that. But don't fool yourself. I mean, the telephone companies in Canada, from what I understand, have got huge grants from the government for capital projects. And they're not spending that money in the north or in the smaller communities. It's in the urban areas. I mean, it's sad that even places like Portage la Prairie and Brandon are kind of left behind. And I mean, we're talking 50, 60-year-old, or I don't know how old the technology is. I'm sure Richard could help them, but they're spending it in Winnipeg. Where they're going to make the most money. That's where they're concentrating their efforts. Is where they're going to make. They figure they're going to make the most money. And I've heard it from the brass of the phone company over the years. We're not going to spend money where we don't have competition. They said that right from. I've heard that from many VPs down the director level, managers. I mean, they're not going to spend money where there's not competition. And even just outside the city of Winnipeg, there's no competition. They're not going to spend the money.
We've seen a significant reduction in jobs from a lot of these regional areas as well.
Reduction in jobs in the regional areas.
Not that they ever were hotbeds of employment, but with Brandon in particular, we've got about 9 folks left out there, and that's just in the last week we had to less than half. So I'd have to go back and give you the number,
But there's not.
yeah.
Team has 9 folks in Brandon now.
Yeah.
Half as many as it might.
There's a whole building out there. It's basically a ghost town. It's got a little bit of a call center.
Yeah. Like every little town, not every little town, but most small towns and every larger town, whether, if you go up north, I'll just bring that up, you talked about the northern communities. You go to Thompson, Laughlin, Vaughan, they had their own business centers.
Yeah.
They had their own sales centers. They had, whether it was, Unifor and Team and IBW people, they were everywhere. And over the years, they shut them down. And then, after a few more years, I would say that our group probably was affected. Well, it's probably the same across the board, but every little town had a technician.
Yes.
It seemed, because they took care of that surrounding area. Well, our technicians now are traveling hours and hours on end. And I mean, they still have a duty to service the communities, but at a higher cost now because, our technicians are traveling so much further than it used to be, right?
And similar for our folks too.
That kind of stat in the paper about that. As well, it was
Absolutely.
like 70 communities had offices and now it's down to 20.
Again, going back
Out
to
of my
the
head, I wouldn't
different
say.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
priorities.
Right.
Thompson, the Paw, Selkirk, even Flin Flon, all these communities have huge offices, like buildings that could house many employees. And with today's remote work, those jobs can be brought back to Manitoba, to those centers. Like, it wouldn't cost Bell any money. They have the infrastructure in place. They could put an employee there today one of our team members to do good unionized work that is being done offshore or centrally in Toronto or from somebody's home. So these are good options that they'll have.
It sounds, well, Aaron, you mentioned, excuse me, but you mentioned that there's job postings now that somehow or other, in every region, but not Manitoba. I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand what you were saying.
Sure. What we see often, in fact, there's probably one up there right now. If you go to bell.ca and their careers website externally, what we see are jobs that they list work locations. So the work locations are jobs that can be done by our members, and they will have Vancouver, Victoria, Calgary, Edmonton. They skip us, then they go to Toronto, Montreal, Halifax.
These are the locations from which these jobs can be executed.
Correct, yeah. So obviously this work can be done from anywhere across the country, but yet our members are being excluded from these opportunities. Winnipeg isn't even being listed. To us, it appears that we are being discriminated against, and we had a recent arbitration decision that's come down recently where the arbitrator determined, yes, Bell did discriminate against our members. It was stemming from a 2021 downsizing that had the VRTIP and then layoff of 3 of our members. And Bell was found to have violated our collective agreement in proceeding to lay off, and they reached their target already. And then they proceeded to go above and beyond layoff our members. And they were found to discriminate against our members for not considering them for these were called national roles that they could do, that were available to them outside of Manitoba. So, we've tried to work with Bell and go down every avenue available to us. During the last round of negotiations, we reached a letter of understanding so that to have them include our members to have them include Winnipeg as posting locations so that our members would just have a shot at these jobs. We thought through that letter of understanding, we expected to see more instances of at least Winnipeg being located on these postings as well. But we're disappointed to see that they're still skipping us. That being said, again, we're always hopeful that things are going to improve. And just last week, we did receive our first notification
That manager would be so discriminating.
Yes, and we asked them to provide a business rationale. And so far, the only thing that we have received from them is that we are unionized.
So in like in Ontario, for instance, the folks that do the work that your members do,
Correct.
They are not unionized.
Correct. We are, our level of membership is only unionized at Bell in Manitoba.
I see. That's good. Thanks.
You're very welcome. It is a significant factor, we believe.
Yeah.
And it's something that Doug highlights very well in this report.
Wow. Yeah, so, super interesting. Thanks, guys.
It is an interesting story.
Thank you. Great questions.
All right.
Anything else? Well, thank you all for coming. Thank you to our panelists. Thanks for jumping in. And thanks so much to Doug for all your work on this. It's important. And the timeline, I know will get a lot of interest as well, so people can read up on what happened exactly when. So thanks so much to your support, and
Thank you, Molly. I have to give a shout out to the CCPA. You guys do such important work. It's now as we're heading into this period where it's going to become increasingly more difficult to tell fake news between real news. The importance of your work, I think, has grown in significance. And the analysis and research you do is fantastic. So thank you very much for the work that you do. And so forth.
our honor to do it.